Cowboy found Apache with a blood-red rope, and the knot she tied bound their fate. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Jake Thompson had spent years alone on his ranch in the vast, dry lands of the western frontier. His days consisted of tending to cattle, fixing fences, and living in the silence of a world that seemed to have forgotten him. But one day, as the sun began to set over the horizon, casting an orange glow across the barren land, Jake's life was about to change forever. While riding back to his ranch after a long day, Jake noticed something odd, a figure stumbling along the edge of the creek that ran through his land. At first, he thought it might be an animal or a lost traveler, but as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. It was a woman, and not just any woman. She was dressed in tattered clothes and had a blood-red rope tied around her waist. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and her legs appeared to be barely holding her up. She looked like she had been through hell. Without hesitation, Jake dismounted and approached her. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to ease her obvious panic. She flinched at the sound of his voice, and for a moment, Jake thought she might run. But instead, she collapsed into his arms, too weak to stand any longer. Jake could feel the weight of her body, and his protective instincts kicked in. "Don't worry," he whispered, lifting her up gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." As he carried her toward his ranch, Jake couldn't help but wonder what had brought her here, to his isolated land. She was clearly from one of the local Native American tribes, but he couldn't quite place which one. He had seen a few Apache scouts in the area, but he hadn't crossed paths with any recently. He also couldn't ignore the blood-red rope that was still tied around her. It seemed important, like it carried some kind of meaning. When he reached his cabin, he carefully laid her on the bed, covering her with a warm blanket. She was barely conscious, but she managed to mutter something. "They're coming for me," she whispered, her voice shaky with fear. Jake's brow furrowed. "Who's coming for you?" he asked, but the woman only shook her head weakly. She seemed to be fading in and out of consciousness. Jake took a moment to catch his breath and figure out what to do next. He wasn't a doctor, but he had enough knowledge of treating wounds from years of working alone on the ranch. He noticed that the woman had a gash on her arm, and the blood-red rope was tied tightly around her waist as though it had been used to restrain her. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, but one thing was clear: she needed help, and he was the only one who could offer it. He grabbed his first aid kit and began cleaning her wound, doing his best to make her as comfortable as possible. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary encounter. The knot in the rope she had tied was strange, almost ceremonial. Jake didn't know much about Native American customs, but he knew enough to understand that certain actions, symbols, and rituals carry deep meaning. What had this woman gone through? And why was she here, on his ranch, all alone? Jake could feel a sense of destiny, as if this meeting was somehow meant to be. Little did he know, the knot she had tied, the blood-red rope, and the fate that bound them together were about to lead them both down a path that would change their lives forever. As Jake sat by the fire that night, the only sounds were the crackling of the logs and the distant howling wind. The woman, Ayana, had finally fallen into a deep sleep, her breath steady and calm. He sat watching her, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. His mind kept returning to the blood-red rope, the strange knot she had tied, and the whisper she had muttered before losing consciousness. "They're coming for me." Jake didn't know who they were, but the thought sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong, something bigger than just helping a stranger. He needed to know more, but for now, all he could do was wait. Hours passed, and Jake tried to rest, though sleep came in fitful waves. He kept an ear open for any sound of approaching danger, but the night remained silent. The next morning, Ayana stirred. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking as if adjusting to the light streaming through the cabin's window. Jake stood up, his boots creaking on the wooden floor as he made his way to her side. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice soft, but with an edge of concern. She winced slightly as she sat up, pressing a hand to her head. I don't remember much," she said quietly. Her voice was raspy, like she hadn't spoken in days. "You saved me," she added, looking at Jake with a mixture of gratitude and something else, something Jake couldn't quite place. He nodded, though he felt awkward under her gaze. "You were in trouble. I couldn't just leave you out there," he said simply. Ayanna looked down at the blood-red rope still tied around her waist, and her expression grew distant. "That rope, it belongs to my tribe," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a symbol of protection, and of fate." Jake raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Protection?" he asked. She nodded, her eyes still focused on the rope. "When someone is marked by the rope, it means they are destined to be helped or protected by the one who finds them. It's our way." Jake sat down beside her, his interest piqued. "So, you believe we're connected because of this rope?" Ayanna nodded again, though she didn't meet his eyes. "It's not just the rope," she said slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "It's the knot. The way it's tied. It's meant to bind us together." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had heard stories of fate and destiny, but he had never put much stock in them. Yet here he was, sitting next to a woman who seemed to believe that something as simple as a knot in a rope could change the course of their lives. "I don't understand," Jake admitted. "How could a knot like that bind us together?" Ayanna finally looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to determine whether he would understand. "It's the way of our people," she said softly. "We believe that when someone ties a knot like this, it's a sign that we are connected, no matter the distance, no matter the time. And the one who finds the knot becomes part of the person's fate." Jake swallowed hard. He had always been a man of logic, of action, but this was something he couldn't quite grasp. He looked down at the knot in the rope, then back at Ayanna, wondering if he was truly part of her fate now. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Ayanna's gaze softened, and she seemed to consider his question for a moment. "Now we wait," she said. "Wait for what?" Jake pressed, though part of him was already dreading the answer. Ayanna looked at him, her expression serious. "The ones who are coming," she said, her voice low. "They will not stop until they find me. And now they will come for you too." Jake's chest tightened at her words. Whoever these people were, they had already caused her enough pain. Now, it seemed, he was tangled in whatever fate awaited them both. The weight of her words settled over him, and for the first time in a long time, Jake felt something he hadn't expected: fear. Not for himself, but for Ayanna, for the strange and dangerous connection they now shared. What had he gotten himself into? And what would happen when the ones who were coming finally arrived? I have to say, Jake had never felt more out of place in his entire life. The stillness of his ranch had always been a comfort to him, the wide open spaces and silence that stretched as far as the eye could see. But now, with Ayanna's words still hanging in the air, the space felt suffocating, like it was shrinking around him. They were waiting for something. Someone. Whoever was coming for Ayanna was now coming for him, too. He hadn't signed up for any of this, but somehow, here he was, tangled in a fate that didn't feel like his own. As the day wore on, Jake found himself watching the horizon more than usual. His mind kept returning to Ayanna's warning. They will come for you too. Who were they? And what would they do when they arrived? He didn't know, but the knot in the rope she had tied around herself had already set the course for whatever was coming next. Jake glanced over at her, still resting in the small cot by the fire, her breathing steady. She was exhausted, but there was something in her eyes when she looked at him earlier that made him think she wasn't as helpless as she seemed. She was strong, in a way he couldn't quite understand, and he found himself wanting to protect her. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like he had to. He stood up and walked to the window, scanning the land outside. It looked the same as always, dusty, dry, and empty. But now, it felt like there was a presence lurking just beyond his sight. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, too, just out of reach. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Jake turned back to Ayana, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do now? He wasn't a man of action, not like the cowboys in the stories he had heard growing up. But something in him had shifted, something that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he could do something. I can't just sit here, he muttered to himself. He had to find out who was coming for them. He had to make sure Ayana was safe. Without thinking, Jake grabbed his rifle and headed outside. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he had a feeling it wouldn't be long before something, made itself known. He walked through the brush, moving slowly, listening for any signs of movement. His footsteps were muffled by the dry earth beneath him, and the only sound he could hear was the wind. But then, a noise caught his attention, footsteps. Soft at first, then louder. Jake froze, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached for his rifle, his fingers tightening around the stock. The footsteps were coming closer, but he couldn't see anyone. Then, just as suddenly as the noise had started, it stopped. Jake stood there, his breath shallow, waiting for whatever came next. He glanced back toward the cabin, the feeling of dread settling deeper into his stomach. He didn't know what was out there, but he knew that if they were coming for Ayana, they would come for him, too. He couldn't hide. He couldn't run. And for the first time in his life, Jake Thompson realized that his fate, like Ayana's, was already sealed. I've never been good at waiting, Jake thought as he paced back and forth inside his cabin. The wind outside howled louder now, carrying with it a sense of urgency that matched the racing thoughts in his mind. Every shadow outside seemed to stretch longer than it should, and every creak of the wooden beams overhead made his heart race. He couldn't help but feel that time was running out. Whatever was coming, it was getting closer. Ayana had barely moved from the cot where he had laid her down. She seemed to be sleeping peacefully, but Jake knew better than to assume she was out of danger. The knot she had tied in that blood-red rope, the stories she had shared with him, he couldn't shake the feeling that it meant more than she had let on. He had helped her, yes, but now the question was, who was going to help him? Jake's mind kept returning to the mysterious figures Ayana had mentioned. They will come for you too, she had said. It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. A fact that made his pulse quicken every time he thought about it. Jake walked over to the window, peering out into the dimming light. The land around him seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions, silent and still. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination, that there was no real threat, but deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Something, or someone, was out there. He could feel it. He turned away from the window and grabbed his rifle, checking it one more time to ensure it was loaded. He wasn't sure what he was preparing for, but he needed to be ready. The door creaked open slowly, and Jake's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. But it was just Ayana, standing in the doorway, looking stronger than she had a few hours earlier. You shouldn't be up, Jake said, stepping forward to help her. She waved him off, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. I'm fine, she replied, though her voice was still hoarse. We need to talk. Jake nodded, his mind still spinning from the earlier events. He motioned for her to sit at the table, and they both took a seat, the tension thick in the air. What exactly are you trying to tell me? Jake asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Ayana looked at him, her expression unreadable. I told you before, she said slowly. The knot in the rope binds our fates together. And the ones who are coming, they're not just coming for me. They'll want you too. Jake's chest tightened at her words. Why? What do they want with me? She hesitated for a moment before answering. You've saved me, Jake. You've given me a chance to live, and now they'll want to know why. Why you, a man they've never seen before, would help someone like me. They'll see it as a threat to their power. Jake swallowed hard. Who are they? Why does it matter to them? Ayana looked down at her hands, then back up at him, her eyes dark with something he couldn't quite read. They are the ones who control everything. The ones who keep us from having any hope. They're the ones who decide who lives and who dies. And right now, they want to make an example of you. Jake stood up, pacing again. This was all too much to process. He had always been a man of action, but this was different. He wasn't prepared for whatever game they were playing. I didn't ask for this, he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to Ayana. None of us do, she replied softly. But you're in this now, just as much as I am. We don't have a choice. Jake turned to face her, determination creeping into his chest. Then we fight. Ayana's eyes softened. I'll fight too. But we must be careful. They are not easily defeated. And you've already done so much by saving me. But you must understand, there's more to this than just us. Jake took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. There was a long silence between them, the only sound the wind rattling the windows. Finally, Jake spoke again. I don't know what's going to happen next, Ayana. But I'm not leaving you to face it alone. Ayana's gaze softened, and she nodded. I never thought you would. Jake could feel the bond between them grow stronger in that moment, as if the blood-red rope that tied their fates together was more than just a symbol. It was real. And now, they would have to face whatever came together. I don't know how long they had been sitting there, but the silence between Jake and Ayana stretched longer than either of them expected. The fire in the hearth crackled, its warmth a stark contrast to the cold dread that had settled over Jake. Ayana had told him the truth. They were not just waiting for danger, they were waiting for a reckoning. Jake's thoughts raced. He had spent years living a quiet, isolated life. Helping Ayana had already thrust him into something he had no understanding of, but now he was tangled in a fate he couldn't escape. The knot she had tied, the blood-red rope, it was no longer just an object. It was a symbol, a reminder of the connection between them. And now, that connection was about to be tested in ways he couldn't imagine. How do we prepare for what's coming? Jake asked, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, though he could feel the uncertainty beneath. Ayana looked at him, her face a mixture of determination and concern. We can't truly prepare for them, she said quietly, her gaze focused on the fire. But we can stand together. That's the only way we'll make it through. Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He wasn't used to this, facing an unknown enemy with no clear plan. But there was something about Ayana that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, they could face whatever came their way. The night stretched on, the wind howling outside like a warning, but nothing else stirred. Jake kept his rifle close, but he had a strange feeling that it wasn't just weapons that would keep them safe. It was something more. It was the bond they shared now, whether they liked it or not. Hours passed, and just as Jake thought he might finally fall into a restless sleep, a sound broke the stillness. A soft knock at the door. He tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle at his side. Ayana's eyes widened in alarm, but she quickly stilled, as if listening for something more. Another knock. A little louder this time. Jake moved toward the door cautiously, his heart racing. Who's there? He called out, his voice firm, though. His mind was already racing with possibilities. There was no answer, just another knock. This time more urgent. He didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, he opened the door, rifle raised, ready for whatever danger awaited. But what he saw stopped him in his tracks. Standing on the threshold, shrouded in the dim light of the moon, was a figure, tall, cloaked, and with a presence that seemed almost otherworldly. The wind seemed to part around them, and for a brief moment, Jake wondered if he had imagined the entire thing. But no. There they were, standing in front of him, waiting. You, the figure spoke, their voice low and resonant, are not ready for what comes next. Jake's grip tightened on the rifle, but the figure held up a hand. Put it down, they said. There's no need for violence. Hesitation washed over Jake. Who was this person? What did they want with him and Ayana? And how did they know? Who are you? Jake demanded, his voice steady, though the uncertainty crept in. The figure stepped forward, revealing their face, or rather, the lack of it. It was hidden by a deep hood, shadows masking any features. I am neither friend nor foe, the figure replied. But I am a messenger. A messenger for whom? Ayana spoke, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. For those who will soon come. And for those who have already chosen their path. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. The ones who would come for them, had they already arrived? The figure reached out, their hand holding something small, wrapped in cloth. This, they said, is for you. Jake didn't move. What is it? He asked, his voice tight. The figure did not answer. Instead, they placed the bundle in his hands, and without another word, turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake standing there, still processing everything that had just happened. Ayana moved beside him, her eyes scanning the night. We must open it, she said softly. Jake unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a small, intricately carved stone, glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was beautiful, yet there was something unsettling about it, something that tugged at the edges of his mind. He felt drawn to it, but he couldn't explain why. What is this? He whispered. A sign, Ayana answered, her voice filled with understanding. A sign of what is to come. As the wind howled around them, Jake realized that the night was just beginning. The fate they had been bound to was no longer just a story, it was real, and it was coming for them. I don't know how long they stood there, both staring at the glowing stone, but it felt like an eternity. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake, and the only sound was the faint crackling of the fire behind them. Jake held the stone in his hand, its warmth almost unnerving as it pulsed gently in the quiet night. Ayana's eyes never left it, her expression unreadable. What is it? Jake asked again, his voice quiet, almost reverent. Ayana shook her head slowly, still gazing at the stone. I don't know, she replied, her voice distant. But I feel its power. It's calling to us. Jake tightened his grip on the stone, a strange sensation washing over him. It felt as though it was alive, as if it had its own pulse. His mind raced, trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the last few days. First, Ayana had appeared on his land, a stranger with a blood-red rope, claiming a connection between them. Then, the mysterious figure had arrived, delivering the stone with no explanation other than that it was a sign of what was to come. What was coming? Who was coming? Jake's chest tightened with the weight of uncertainty. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to do with the stone, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. Do you think it's a warning? Jake asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ayana nodded slowly. I think it's more than that, she said, her voice steady. I think it's a choice. Jake's brow furrowed. A choice? Ayana turned to face him, her eyes filled with an intensity he had never seen before. The stone connects us to something greater, she explained, her voice low but firm. It's a bridge between our worlds, a way for us to choose our path. Jake didn't fully understand, but there was something in her words that resonated with him. He could feel it in his bones, a pull that was both terrifying and thrilling. What happens if we don't make the right choice? Jake asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Ayana didn't immediately respond. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on the stone, her fingers brushing lightly against its surface. I don't know, she said softly. But we have to try. They stood in silence for a long time, the weight of the stone between them like an unspoken promise. Finally, Jake nodded, his decision made. All right, he said, his voice resolute. We'll do it together. Ayana smiled, a faint, almost sad smile, but one that carried a sense of relief. Together, she echoed. As they stood there, side by side, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. For the first time in days, Jake felt like he could breathe. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. But even as the sun rose, the unease in his chest remained. The stone, the knot in the rope, the mysterious figure, none of it made sense, but somehow, Jake knew their fates had already been sealed. There was no turning back now. It was the following day when the air finally began to shift. The strange feeling that had been building in Jake's chest ever since the stone had been placed in his hands seemed to intensify with each passing moment. He had barely slept, restless and unsure, while Iona remained by the fire, her gaze focused on the glowing stone. They had agreed to face whatever came together, but the uncertainty was still a heavy weight on Jake's shoulders. The sun had barely risen, but Jake already found himself walking along the edge of his property, looking out across the vast stretch of land. It was all he had ever known, these wide-open spaces, the dust, the wind, but today, it felt different. Everything felt different. The distant mountains, once familiar, now appeared ominous, as if they were hiding something just beyond view. Jake glanced back at the cabin, where Iona stood watching him from the doorway. "Jake!" she called softly, her voice carrying across the quiet land. He turned to face her. "You can feel it, can't you?" she asked, her eyes searching his face. Jake nodded slowly, his heart beating a little faster. "I don't know what it is, but I feel like something's coming. Something big." Iona stepped forward, her eyes never leaving him. "It's the pull of the stone," she said. "It's calling us to make our choice." Jake rubbed his hand over his face, trying to shake the fatigue. "And if we make the wrong choice?" Iona didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to where he stood, placing a hand on his arm. "We don't know what will happen," she said quietly, "but we must choose. We must trust the path that's been set for us." Jake took a deep breath, looking out at the land once more. It felt as though everything had led to this moment. The strange feeling, the pull of the stone, Iona's words, it was all leading him down a road he couldn't turn back from. "So what now?" he asked, his voice low. Iona looked at him with determination. "We wait. But we are not alone. We must trust the connection we have." Jake's heart skipped a beat at her words. She had mentioned this connection before, but now, standing here, it felt more real than ever. The knot in the rope, the stone, and the bond that had tied them together, it was all more than just a symbol. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite put into words. As they stood there, a rustling sound from the trees caught Jake's attention. He stiffened, his instincts kicking in. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Iona turned her head, her expression suddenly alert. "They're here," she said quietly. Jake's grip tightened on the rifle at his side, his pulse quickening. "Who?" he asked, his voice strained. "The ones who are coming," Iona replied, her gaze fixed on the trees. Jake couldn't see anything yet, but the air had shifted again. The weight of the moment settled in, the feeling of something about to happen, something he couldn't control. He knew this was it, the moment they had been waiting for. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and cloaked, moving with a purpose. The figure didn't seem to hurry, but there was a sense of inevitability in their steps, as if they knew exactly where they were going. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the figure drew closer, their presence sending a chill down his spine. Another figure followed, then another, until there were 3 in total. They stopped a few yards away, the leader of the group taking a step forward. Jake's grip on his rifle tightened. "You," the leader said, their voice calm but firm, "are the one who holds the stone." Jake didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The figure was right. The stone, the rope, the knot, they had all led to this moment. The leader of the group stepped closer, and Jake could feel the tension in the air. "We have come to see if you are worthy," the figure said. "The stone does not choose lightly. You have been called for a purpose." Jake's chest tightened, and his heart raced. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew that whatever happened next, it would change everything. He looked over at Iona, who stood by his side, her expression calm but resolute. She had prepared him for this, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. The leader's gaze shifted to Ayana, then back to Jake. The time has come, they said. Will you make your choice? Jake's throat went dry as he looked at the group, knowing this was the moment that would determine everything. The choice had always been there, just out of reach, but now it was real. And the only thing Jake knew for sure was that whatever came next, he would face it with Ayana by his side. The leader's gaze never wavered as they took another step forward, the weight of their presence pressing heavily on Jake's chest. He could feel his heart beating faster, the anticipation of what was coming next tightening every muscle in his body. Ayana stood silently beside him, her eyes steady, her hand almost imperceptibly brushing against his, as though silently telling him to be strong. The leader of the group spoke again, their voice like gravel, but carrying a clear authority. The choice has been made for you, but it is still yours to claim. You must decide now. Jake swallowed hard, his throat dry. The stone still pulsed faintly in his hand, its warmth an odd comfort and a reminder of the strange bond he now shared with Ayana. The figures before him had come for something that would define the rest of his life, and possibly Ayana's as well. They were waiting. Jake's mind raced. He hadn't wanted any of this. He had lived his life quietly, without much of a purpose other than tending to his ranch and surviving day by day. But now, standing at the precipice of something much larger, he realized that he couldn't step back. He had been brought here for a reason, and that reason was entwined with Ayana's fate. What is it that you want from me? Jake finally asked, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty that gripped him. The leader of the group stepped closer, their eyes scanning him with an unreadable intensity. The stone chooses its bearer. It chooses those who are connected to something greater. You, Jake Thompson, have been chosen. But only you can unlock its power. Jake's eyes narrowed. How do I unlock it? The answer lies within you, the leader replied, their tone cryptic. But you must be willing to embrace it. Only then can you fulfill your purpose. The words didn't make sense, but Jake didn't have time to question them. Ayana, standing silently beside him, stepped forward. She turned her head to look at him, her eyes filled with both fear and resolve. Jake, she said quietly, we can do this. Together. We are meant to. Jake looked down at the stone in his hand once more. He had spent his life alone, only relying on himself to survive. But now, everything was different. He wasn't alone anymore. He was connected to Ayana, to something much bigger than himself, and somehow, he knew this was the moment that would define the rest of his life. He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the decision, but also the clarity of it. I'm ready, he said, his voice low but steady. The leader gave a small nod, a barely perceptible acknowledgement of his decision. Then let it begin, they said. The ground beneath Jake's feet seemed to shift slightly, the air around him growing heavier, as though something was about to change. He felt it, the pull, the connection, the moment when everything would be revealed. But as the leader turned to the other two figures, Jake's attention was momentarily drawn to the stone. It glowed brighter in his hand, the pulse now unmistakable, as if answering the call of something far beyond the physical world. The figures around him remained still, watching him closely, waiting. And in that moment, Jake realized that whatever was coming, whatever was about to unfold, he was no longer just a passive participant. He was a part of it. The question was no longer, what happens next? It was, how will we face it? With Ayana by his side, Jake knew they would find the strength to face whatever challenge lay ahead. Together. The air grew still, charged with an electric tension as Jake stood there, the stone still warm in his hand. Ayana's presence beside him felt like a steady anchor, yet even with her by his side, the weight of the moment pressed heavily on his chest. The leader of the group remained silent, watching them, waiting for something to unfold. Jake could feel the ground beneath him shift, the feeling almost imperceptible, like the land itself was reacting to what was happening. The stone pulsed in his hand, its light growing brighter as if it was responding to the decision he had made. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew that nothing would be the same after this. This is it, Jake thought, his mind racing. The moment everything changes. As the light from the stone illuminated the space around them, the leader stepped forward, their voice calm but carrying an undeniable power. The choice has been made, they said, their eyes locked on Jake. Now you must embrace what comes next. Jake's grip tightened on the stone. He had no idea what this was all leading to, but it felt like his entire life had brought him to this point. Everything was about to change, but there was no turning back. The leader raised their hand, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The air around them thickened, and Jake felt a surge of energy flow through him, his body humming with a power he couldn't explain. It was as if the stone had unlocked something deep within him, something ancient and primal. The figure before him didn't flinch as the energy swirled around them. Instead, they spoke again, their voice almost reverberating with the force of their words. You are bound to something greater now, they said. The bond between you and the stone is unbreakable, but it is up to you to decide how to use it. The fate of more than just yourself rests in your hands. The weight of those words settled over Jake, but he refused to let fear overtake him. He had made his choice, and now he had to see it through. He looked over at Ayana, and for the first time in what felt like forever their eyes met. She didn't need to say anything. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a shared resolve. They would face this together, no matter what. Jake turned back to the leader, his voice firm. What do we do now? He asked. The leader's gaze softened ever so slightly. Now, they said, you begin your journey. Without warning, the space around them seemed to stretch, the earth beneath their feet shifting. The ground opened up before them, a path leading deep into the unknown. Jake's heart raced, but there was no hesitation in his step. With Ayana beside him, he stepped forward, the stone's glow lighting their way as they began the journey that would define their fates. The path ahead was uncertain, but together, they would face whatever came their way. The bond they had formed, the choices they had made, and the stone that had connected them were all they had. And it would be enough. They walked into the unknown, ready for whatever destiny had in store for them.